Welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Director of High Performance at the Toronto Blue Jays, Angus Mugford. This episode of the Pacey Performance Podcast is sponsored by Val Performance, the team behind the NordBord hamstring testing system. So the NordBord is the fastest and easiest, most accurate way to measure hamstring strength. So with the NordBord, you'll get the right information to make the right decisions at the right time. If you want to check them out, you can check them out at valdperformance.com. This episode of the Pacey Performance Podcast is sponsored by Train with Push, creators of the Push Band. So the Push Band is the first scientifically validated wearable device to provide objective insights into your performance in the gym. So using accelerometers and a gyroscope, the Push Band is able to use bar speed to regulate load and volume based on your ability in the gym on any given day. So you can use the Push Band to quickly establish 1RMs with submaximal load so you can plan with confidence. So the Push Band portal also allows you to create programs before entering the gym to make change on the fly depending on how you are performing on that given day. So you can customize everything from target velocity ranges to differentiating velocities for warm-up and creating working sets and supersets for yourself or your athletes. So if you do want to know more about Train with Push and the Push Band, get yourself over to trainwithpush.com. They also got a great blog, so you can catch up with some guest bloggers such as Mladen Ivanovic and Dan Baker. So be sure to check them out at trainwithpush.com. Thanks for tuning in to episode 86 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. So today we've got Angus Mugford coming from the Toronto Blue Jays on the phone. So it's going in a slightly different direction on this podcast just because of Angus's quite unique background unique as in context of previous podcast guests, in that his background is psychology. So he's quite involved with the Association of Sports Psychology. And we can discuss culture, which is something that has come up so many times in the past as a bit of a side note, but I was really keen to kind of delve into Angus's background a little bit more and discuss culture as a real prime topic for the chat. We also discussed mentoring, CPD, and how psychology and maybe a sports psychologist would fit into the bigger picture of the interdisciplinary team. So great chat with Angus. I'm going to let you get straight into the podcast today because it's a really good chat. Hope you enjoy it. I'd appreciate any comments, any feedback from this episode or previous episodes, and I'll speak to you soon. So again, really appreciate the time and effort of our guest today in Angus Mugford, coming from Toronto via Dallas, via elsewhere. So welcome to the podcast, Angus.
Thanks so much, Rob. Really appreciate the invitation and get a chance to talk a little bit.
Pleasure. So when we started talking over email, I was half expecting a Scottish voice. Then thought, nah, it's going to be American. And then happy to hear that English. So do you want to give us a bit of a background on yourself and what you're currently doing in Toronto?
Sure, you bet. I think I confuse a lot of people with the name and the history, but I'm actually born and bred in Cambridgeshire, funnily enough, and spent most of my life there. But I'm closing in on 20 years now in the United States. So I call it a mid-Atlantic accent, so it's not really English anymore, and it's not American. So I just enjoy confusing people in the middle.
So, what's your title at Toronto is Director of High Performance. Do you want to give us a little bit of a insight into what that is, maybe what you did before Toronto and your kind of journey so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm in a new role really here. The last 6 months, just incredibly fortunate to, I've had a career that I'm very proud of, and just really fortunate now to be in Major League Baseball, which is not a sport that I grew up with, but has just incredible opportunity to really look at the interdisciplinary side of what we're doing to help athletes be better. So whether those are, the quick context of baseball is that each major league team actually has a roster of about 250 players throughout developmental levels. So, from draftees that have come straight out of high school all the way through to the 25-man squad at the major league level. And so my role is to help oversee the sports medicine, the strength and conditioning, the mental nutrition, and all those kind of sports science components together to help make our players available, but also help them develop and help them perform at their very best. Now there's a lot of those kinds of roles I know throughout different sport worlds, but certainly very new to baseball, and this is really kind of I think a natural extension of my journey for the last 12 years in Florida at a place called IMG Academy that has a great track record of developing talent, probably most famously around tennis and Nick Bollettieri, and obviously a lot of stories about Andre Agassi and Sharapova and other players arriving there as kids and then kind of leaving as Grand Slam champions. So really lucky to be around some amazing coaches, amazing resources, and players themselves across 8 different sports there, and even towards the end of my tenure, expanding beyond the work that we were doing on campus at IMG to also areas of the elite military special operations, as well as coaches and teams and things outside the academy that were looking to harness performance between the ears. So, the sports psychology, which is my kind of training and background. But probably more importantly is how do we put all the pieces together around the physical, the skill, the nutrition, and all those components so that we can really, at the end of the day, establish high performance for people.
Mm-hmm. So I know absolutely zero about baseball, but what I do know is that last year when I came over the Atlantic to Seattle, I was going to try to see a game. And as we discussed before, I looked at the fixture list and they were actually away, which would be fine because I was there for a week. So I thought, I'll catch when they're at home. Well, they're away for 7 games in a row. Right. So that kind of freaked me out. But that I suppose, as we've discussed previously, it kind of tells you all you need to know about baseball. But do you want us to kind of give anyone, especially in the UK, maybe not familiar with how things work with regards to fixtures and the kind of demands of baseball and how you and your staff have to kind of deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone who's spent a time in a particular sport, really respects the nuances and differences between different things. I mean, there's a lot of things that are fundamental, across performance, but yeah, the context of what these guys do is pretty remarkable. And for their regular season, they're playing 162 games in 181 days. So literally, I mean, it's an everyday sport. And even in the spring training period beforehand, they play about 30 games in somewhere around 40 days. So it's remarkable when you look at it. And I think so. One of the challenges, obviously, for a medical team or a strength and conditioning team traditionally is recovery. It's a sport about recovery, but not losing the sight of the fact that it's not all recovery. There's got to be some stress and loading in there as well to help players continue to improve. But it is relentless. We got in last night to Dallas from San Francisco, at about 2 a.m. So, when you think of that kind of travel schedule, and like you said in Seattle, they were away for for 7 games, but that's only a week. So
Yeah.
it does go by fast.
So what kind of demands are on these players? Obviously, playing so many games. What is it? I mean, from coming totally naively on this point, but what are the actual demands on these guys?
Well, clearly, this is not like football or a rugby game where you can get really pretty banged up. I mean, there's 9 innings, so players that are batting probably only have 3 to 4 at bats, where they may take, maybe let's say 4 swings or so at each of those at bats. They may have the ball fielded to them much the same probably stress load as you would expect in cricket, although games are only about 2.5, maybe 3 hours long.
Yeah.
So I think it is more of the general wear and tear of the fact that players typically are available every day, except for the pitcher, who is typically in a 5-day rotation. So the starting pitchers will pitch anywhere up to 100, 115 pitches in a game. And those, depending on what their specialty is, just like cricket, you got your fast bowlers and medium and slow pace, but predominantly, there's fairly high stress on those guys. So there's a lot more built-in recovery around that. But there's probably 5, 6 pitchers who may be asked to come in and pitch for just a couple of innings, and that may be almost every day. So those guys have a different kind of workload and volume, and so these are all kinds of different things that we're trying to profile and really find out what those loads are and what the best ways are to both strengthen and train, but also recover.
Mm-hmm. So, like you mentioned, the obviously the fast bowlers in cricket are very similar to the pitchers in baseball. What kind of things are you putting in place to be able to monitor that load of your pitchers? Obviously, barring counting pitches.
Sure. I mean, it's an interesting one because we're a little behind in the States as far as activation and use of some of the technologies out there. For a number of different reasons. So the one part that's really great about the influx of stats and availability of data information is how much is generated from the camera. And from you can look at a stat sheet in baseball, probably in the newspaper, and you're overwhelmed with different percentages and things like TrackMan and things are obviously looking at velocity and flight and so on. So, but that's certainly a nut we're trying to crack and actually get some better access to better information. And I think that's somewhere we're a little behind right now relative to some of the other sports out there in Europe and elsewhere.
As a director of high performance, how I just want to link them two together. How you're obviously dealing with the players, but with such a packed fixture list, and obviously a huge amounts of travelling over the country. How are you taking care of your staff as well as taking care of your players? Because obviously there's a huge demand on them being away from family, a huge demand on yourself, being away from family and lots of travelling, lots of air miles, lots of hotel beds, lots of hotel food, all that kind of thing. How are you, as a director of high performance, helping your staff deal with that?
What a great question. I think one of there's two contexts to that. One is that I obviously came in 6 months ago, but fact is many of the staff are existing and have been here 20 years or longer in some cases. So there's very much a culture already that understands the intensity, the volume, the life, and there's very much a process to that. Like I mentioned, there's 250 players, and so it's a development system for players from rookies right through to the major league. But in a lot of respects, a lot of our staff have gone through that process too, where they've started out with rookie teams and and they've, made progress along the way and gone up levels. So they've literally lived that journey and developed their own routines. But on my side, and I've certainly brought in a few staff, where baseball is new to them. I mean, it's not just looking at high performance and human factors for our athletes, but much like you say, our coaches too. And I think a key part of my philosophy, and what we're trying to build out too, is that, it's not that everything's about psychology, and it just in the same way, it's not about the biomechanics or the physiology or the nutrition or rest and recovery. It's about that individual and how do we maximize those resources around people. So how can we use each other as resources? How can we keep, perspective in mind and value family time or communication time or downtime? And at the end of the day, make this fun. It's about a journey of impacting players and enjoying it. So practicing what we preach around those kind of principles is really key and certainly a key part of my role.
So how many members of staff do you have for all them players?
Well, it's within the high performance team, we have approximately 30 individuals, but we also have, for example, an expanded kind of medical network of consultants who come in and help us either with game support or referrals or different things periodically. So it's a pretty big team though, and I think one of the big challenges around that is that we are split up all over the country, and actually 3 countries. So Canada and Dominican Republic and also all across the state. So that certainly is a challenge where we're all together for spring training and kind of the end of the year instructional leagues, but otherwise we're spread out thin. So that is a new kind of challenge.
So in a previous podcast, well, actually last week, with Kelvin Giles, gives a really good chat, and he kind of got into a little bit about, I think just on a little bit of a rant about hiring and who he hired or who he's hired since 1970 or whenever he started at English Athletics.
Wow.
And he was talking about that he's only ever appointed one PhD. And he went on a bit of a rant as to why. But I just wanted to kind of pick your brains, having been in the industry, maybe not since 1970, but but still been around, and just what are the kind of, firstly, psychological factors
Sure.
that obviously that have been your background that you look for when hiring?
Yeah, absolutely. I have to pinch myself in how lucky I've been, and IMG was a great experience for me. It began more with the internship program we had, and looking at selecting interns to come in, and what were the competencies and things we were looking for, and that ended up actually helping. As I became kind of leader of that team, looking at competencies from the young practitioner, but actually threads that would help impact and help grow, all of our staff up to senior leadership too. And I have had the opportunity to hire, a bunch of people, probably about 45, 50, when it's all said and done. But I mean, so there's 2 kind of categories, I would say. And again, the bias is a little bit more around the psychology side, but competence is kind of a given. So I think anyone who's applying and anyone you're looking at, you're almost making the assumption that there's a knowledge base or set of core competencies and skills for that job role. But I think that's kind of the lowest bar in a lot of respects. Well, that obviously depends on context of what you're hiring for. I think two other areas that are really key is the work ethic and commitment to excellence. One of my colleagues who would help with a lot of the hiring, Dr. Taryn Morgan, she's amazing. She actually really liked to see people who had, especially as young practitioners, that they'd had multiple jobs. And she loved people who'd been in the service industry, so who had been waiters or barmen or roles like that, where it's a lot of grunt work, but you're also facing facing a customer, and that you're able to, I think, use some of those skills. And I think, there's something to that. I think that work ethic and also communication skills are super important. Growth mindset is something I really look for. And this may be where the area around PhDs is kind of an interesting one, because I think you have some master's level or undergrads who think they know it all, and you have some PhDs who are really hungry and thirsty for knowledge and to get better. And so I think you got to be careful what you label it. But I certainly see, I want people to be aware of where their knowledge gaps are. So I like asking about that and seeing where people think, where do they want to grow and where do they think the holes in their knowledge are. And, they're hungry to get better and improve. But fundamentally, two of the game changers for me, especially in the psych profession or role, are relationship skills. So your ability to get on with anybody. So whether that is a player, an athlete, a coach, a parent, a front office or administrator, that, do you have just good personal skills where you can build relationships? And the second one that, again, I think is the game changer is the communication skills. And this is where, can you articulate, a fairly complex concept or theory in really simple, bite-sized chunks? Can you really communicate effectively and efficiently? And those two things alone, I think, probably have, for me, a lot of influence over the other kind of core basic things of growth mindset, work ethic, competence.
Mm-hmm. So does that span across the whole high performance team? You're still looking for them two game changers, as you call it, or would you?
Yeah, I really do, and I think that's because I do see the power of the team is more important than the power of the individual. And it's not to say, individual creativity is obviously huge, and you want that kind of individual identity, but I think that the relationship skills, the communication skills allow another level of the interdisciplinary piece to fit together. And so I think regardless of, whether a strength coach, trainer, physio, coach, I think those things are huge in everyone being able to perform better.
So I'd written down there about assessing psych factors in an interview, but I think I kind of want to expand on that, if you would, about assessing psychological factors in athletes just as much as kind of prospective coaches or interns. Yeah. How do you go about that?
I think it's knowing that it's trying to get broad snapshots. It's rarely about one nugget of information that's going to tell you the whole story. It's about trying to see people in different environments and gather different pieces of information. So one thing we did early on that was really key for the internship process was video. Literally seeing people present. We used to ask for videos to be submitted, which 10 years ago was a real chore. So in some respects, that actually helped to select the people that were really serious, and that they would also have to be pretty creative, where we'd ask them to film themselves doing a group session. So they had to be creative and show some initiative around that. But then it also gave us a feel for their presentation style, which was important for the context of the job that they'd be performing. But it also got to actually see their performance, see how they interact with others, read some of the nonverbals as well as the content of what they were actually trying to produce. And then, certainly video conference interviews are key, assuming that you can't fly people in or get people to come and meet in person. But even if they are there in person, can you have them meet with multiple different people and get perspectives, so you can start painting a picture rather than just trying to, get the magic answer in a 30-minute conversation, which is not usually very effective.
I've just written down again about creating an environment for athletes from a psychological point of view. Just I'll kind of put some context around that, hopefully. Some players kind of thrive in an environment. I'm just talking about S&C because that's what comes to mind. Some players may thrive in an environment where everyone's in the gym, the kind of music's blaring, really getting into their session. But others may thrive in an environment where they're on their own or they're in a small group and they're doing their own thing. They're left to it. There's kind of not the everyone watching type of scenario.
Sure.
How would you, or how have you in the past kind of tried to not cater for everyone, but create an environment that people can thrive in, with different preferences? If that ramble makes any sense at all.
Well, I'll give it a shot, but I think it's really valid, right? It's like, what kind of environment do you want to create as a coach or influencer in the system? And I think so. Context is huge. So understanding what's the context and culture of the sport and the coach or manager. What's your role within that? What you have probably a mission and core values that are really important that will help you make those decisions. From a psychological perspective, though, I think awareness and variability is key, right? So there are times when your environment is going to be chaotic or high energy. And like you said, some people are going to thrive in that, whereas others are going to thrive when they're quiet, they're on their own. And I think the reality of most dynamic sports is that your environment's going to change and you don't control that. You can only control your response to those environmental changes. As the old adage goes, control the controllable. So what we certainly try and teach athletes is to do exactly that, is to be aware of where they thrive and then maybe where they struggle a little bit more, so that they can identify that. But more importantly is that they're crystal clear on what they have control over to be at their best. And then it's putting them in situations where they have to do that. So, there's no point in having practice or an environment every day and then you're going into a completely different environment for game time. And likewise, if you have your game time may be all, one particular way throughout the season, but when it comes down to the business end and championships or qualifiers, if the environment's completely different, you're screwed. However, if you have awareness of where you thrive and then you focus on the process of how to be able to achieve that, and you've had practice at being able to shift in different environments, you're going to be way more confident, and ideally you're going to be way more prepared to handle that. And I think that's setting you up for success.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So just to move on a little bit, I just want to talk about something that came up in our conversation last week, which was transition. And you said that word, and it kind of struck a chord with me with regards to everyone being in transition. I think you said that, so I'm kind of stealing that. But whether it be an athlete going from under 12s, under 13s, or transitioning from kind of a development side to a full-time professional, or whether it be moving from club to club, how have you kind of helped players in the past or currently deal with transition and movement of around age groups, around teams, and that type of thing?
Sure, yeah, great question. I think fundamentally, like you said, the easiest way to look at it is we are in the high performance business, right? So we're, by trade, helping people improve and get better. So therefore, we're all about transition. So it's really kind of looking as awareness of, again, of context and our current state, and then having a picture of what's the ideal state of where we're going and helping people get from A to B. So part of that equation, apart from just having people embrace a growth mindset and asking themselves, how can I get better today? Whether that's they're facing some adversity or doubt or something new, that they're embracing that with, it's an opportunity for me to learn and grow in it and get better, is really actually a very simple way of looking at all the complexities of those kinds of things. And I think that's a really cool thing to be able to foster in your environment, kind of take a step back and what we were talking about before. Is every day is our opportunity to transition and improve. But from a coach's standpoint, though, I think one way also to look at it is the relationship between demands and resources. So, in some respects, that's stress, right? What we can, if as long as we have the resources to cope with the demands, we're in good shape. When that tips the other way and our demands outweigh the resources we have, whether that's emotional coping resources or kind of more physical or economical resources, then that's when the negative stress starts to outweigh things. So I think when we're conscious of those two things, it helps us as coaches be more aware of what are the potential demands here for this kind of transition. Whether it's literally maturity, we're talking about a kid who's physically growing or, psychologically growing or becoming independent. They've just moved away from home and now they're, going through that psychosocial development and transition. Whatever it is, do we understand the demands of what this individual's going through as a transition or skill base? This is often one we see where, a player is making the assumption they need to win or they need to hit these outcome goals and targets. Whereas the reality as coaches, we're asking them to learn, and we're actually asking them to develop and develop a skill. And by focusing on the outcome, they're actually getting worse. And so, do we understand the demands, and then are we helping them with the resources to be successful? And without rambling too much, I want to kind of connect back to the hiring and professional development piece, which I kind of use self-determination theory as a check, as a kind of a manager and leader. I really try to foster the big three that they talk about in self-determination theory, which is, do I feel competent? Do you feel good at whatever skill it is you're trying to do? Number two is relatedness. Am I connected to a bigger cause, whether that's a team or people or something bigger than yourself? But three is autonomy, this idea that you have control and influence over your situation. And again, sometimes I think coaches often do a great job of empowering the player to take some ownership, whether it's asking questions, whether it's having them talk through decisions rather than just imposing and telling them what their schedule is and what they're doing. So when you can combine like developing the resources for a player or person themselves so that they're an active agent in that, or also thinking about the team or support that you're putting around a player to be effective and to transition well in whatever context that is.
When you mentioned autonomy there, do you think as coaches we do that well by giving players autonomy, or is that often a scary thought and kind of people shy away from that?
It's both, right? I think it's certainly, what I have seen a lot actually is a lot of people coach the way that they like to be coached or the way that they were coached. And I think that probably in the UK we do a better job of some of the certifications and education that you go through to really understand the impact of some of that. But I think opportunities we have for players to learn about themselves and about why making decisions is important for themselves so that we're not enabling doing everything for them, I think is key. And I think that's a good question for a coach, especially a young coach, to ask themselves too, is what are the assumptions that you're making about the training program or the way that you're instructing a player. And maybe that goes back to our conversation about environment and the values and what you're trying to instill, in the team, and then especially developing leaders for on the field, especially if they've got to make decisions on their own in the heat of the battle.
So a couple of last things that I want to chat to you about. One is culture, and it seems to come up quite a lot in podcasts that I've done previously. I'd just like to get your thoughts on. It's a huge subject, and one that's quite hard for me anyway to kind of pin down into and get some kind of clear direction from it. But just coming from kind of business point of view, you initially set up like a mission statement, and from there you'd get kind of values and you'd kind of break it down from there. But how do you do that from a high performance environment?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it is kind of nebulous. It means a lot of different things to different people. One of the things I heard that really resonated for me was really culture is a verb, not a noun. I think sometimes when we do the mission statement and values exercise, often it's seen as something once it's completed, it's done, right? And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. And however, it is a framework of how we operate and interact, I think, formally and informally, right? So key part of that is that the people have a say, right? That we're able to talk about and create clarity over what we are trying to accomplish. And the simpler, the better. I think those are, you look at Google or Apple or some of those, companies who've been very, very successful. And I think in the realm of sport, it's not just winning. Everyone's trying to win. It's what are we trying to do that gives that compelling focus of how are we trying to do that. And then going through that process of identifying what values are important to you and what does that really mean and how does that affect you on a daily basis. And ultimately that we start operating that way and that people start to take ownership over that, and every decision we make is kind of run past that almost as a checklist. Are we really committing to excellence, by making this decision? Well, goodness knows there are lots of compromises we have to make. So, and then one of the big things we're focusing a lot on with the Blue Jays is process. Slipping into my American there, but yeah. So for example, we know we're in a results-driven business, but the key is that we're consistent about focusing on the process of how we're doing things. And so by using that as kind of a measuring stick, we're able to kind of keep ourselves in check and that we're transparent about that and that we can all challenge that and be part of that conversation. So I think, so I guess two takeaways would be the importance of walking through that together, with the stakeholders, even if it's a team of 5 of you, in a performance team, to really talk about what is it that we're all here to do and to help with, and is that something compelling and we all agree on? And then, the key values, so not 20, but, what are 3, 4, maybe 5 key things that we want to hold ourselves to, and how do we do that? And kind of setting up a system then for, how you run meetings, how you interact with your players, how does this come alive and be something that's more than just a nice poster on the wall?
Is there any resources out there, Angus, that you've kind of felt really been really valuable to you on this subject? Books.
That is a great question. I did, recently I just read a great book by Michael Henderson called Get Tribal. But there's a lot of different things out there. I'm just, I think Simon Sinek does a couple of wonderful books and a great podcast or a YouTube video that was a TED Talk. Start with why. I think fundamentally getting to the crux of why you're here and why other people are there, and have something that unites people together. I think that's just such a simple concept, but so powerful that's often overlooked. But he followed up that with a second book called Leaders Eat Last. And I think that's a really interesting look at organizations, but also leadership style that is powerful as well. So I would check those ones out.
I'm just writing that down because I read the first book and I thought that was unbelievable. It was a great read and kind of followed on nicely from his TED Talk.
Right.
So I'll definitely get that. But just to round up here, Angus, just want to ask you to tell people where people can find you and see what you've got going on.
Sure. Well, I try to do the Twitter thing every now and then, and things that I come across that I like. So feel free at Angus Mugford. Blessed with a easy name to remember, right? But yeah, so my handle's just at Angus Mugford, and LinkedIn's another good place to connect. And yeah, please feel free to. You could shoot me an email too at angus.mugford@bluejays.com. So happy to help.
Nice. So what's your schedule? Plenty of traveling over the next couple of weeks? I'm adjusting. My wife is very happy I will be home later tonight from Dallas, but home for a few days, and then I'm heading to our academy in the Dominican Republic next week, and then I think we have a series in New York, and then we're actually coming up to draft time, so we'll be up in Toronto for a couple of weeks. Looking at the future Blue Jays joining the organization. Nice. Fun time. Nice. Well, again, thank you very much for your time, and good luck with the traveling, and the rest of the season. So, thanks again.
Thanks so much, Rob. Great talking to you, and keep doing the great work you're doing.
Thanks, mate. Speak to you soon.
All right. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 86 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. So just before I let you go, just want to say a massive thanks to Angus for giving up his time to speak to me on the podcast. And a huge thanks to both Train with Push and Vald Performance for sponsoring the episode today. Again, I would appreciate any feedback from this episode or previous episodes. And thanks again for your continued support of the podcast. It's very, very humbling. And it's been a great experience so far. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in episode 87.